Thanks everybody for coming. Today I'll be talking about Jolt, an open source project by the a16z crypto research and engineering teams built with the intention of unblocking innovation in decentralized systems. I hope to use Jolt as a tangible example of how we, a16z crypto research and engineering, think about our role in an innovation ecosystem, open source software more generally, and future models for funding development. Decentralized systems are ones that push the authority and validation logics to the edges. The most common examples of these are blockchain networks such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. As a sweeping statement of the resulting properties, you get computers or networks which can make commitments. No one entity has power over the other participants in the network, now or at any point in the future. This means new businesses and networks can be built atop these networks without concern that the rules will change when it best suits an intermediary. So for a while, since 2016, snarks have been touted as the scaling solution for blockchain networks. These are succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. And I'm going to go slowly through this because you kind of need to understand this context to understand any of the rest of the stuff we're talking about. So a snark allows a prover to run a program and create a proof that it ran that program, executed it correctly, and they then create a receipt or a proof that they can give to a verifier, and the verifier can check that that proof is correct in significantly less work than running the original program. In some sense, you can see this as compressing the original program. So they execute a program, they compress it, and they can provide it to a verifier who can check that in a lot less work than originally. In the case of a blockchain network, this allows the prover to compress that workload before it reaches the edges of the network where validators check all of the work of the intermediaries. Okay, so finally I can talk about Jolt. So in terms of Jolt's potential, first, you remember the issue, esoteric DSLs, we have to program in that crazy programming language. Jolt is a ZK VM. That means you take a normal programming language like Rust, you target RISC-V, which is a assembly instruction set, and then you can run it on Jolt. The second issue was that there was this 10 to the 8 prover overhead. Jolt brings this down to 10 to the 6 with a potential upside of 10 to the 5. That makes it a lot more practical to run this thing. It's not very, very expensive to create these succinct proofs. One of the biggest issues is that these things are incomprehensible. You write these crazy arithmetic circuits and then no one really knows if they're right. Jolt has a much simpler programming model where you write basically 2 functions and you get all the programmability. We've found that people are better at reading these things. But perhaps most importantly, this is a fully new snark approach. This means that there's potentially more room to grow than the existing approaches and more juice to be squeezed. So the left side here is these snarks that I was talking about. This is where much of the R&D has gone historically, which means that there's been minimal R&D and minimal iterative efforts to improve these things. Unfortunately, it's very expensive for a startup to try to go to a different land, the multivariate land, based on some theory cooked up by 4 academics. There's no experimental section in these papers because it's very hard to build this stuff. And because it goes backwards in the lineage, much of the research and engineering work would have to be redone from scratch. You can't just pick this stuff up off the shelf. So for a startup or business entity, there's maybe too many risks to start from scratch. There are engineering, research, product, and personnel challenges that might be too much to overcome. But we as a venture firm see these kinds of asymmetric opportunities all the time, and we're very comfortable with them. The theory went that if Jolt works, it has massive potential to accelerate all decentralized systems. Jolt is fully open source. It always has been and always will be. Many in the permissionless network ecosystem are thinking about new architectures to be built atop ZK VM systems like Jolt, and we hope many more will come. We hope many of those people that build atop Jolt take some time to learn Jolt and give back to the code base itself so that everybody can grow. Okay, so zooming out a little bit, I wanted to give like a little bit of intuition on where Jolt or ZK VMs like it should be applied. The first is when the prover overhead is less than or equal to the number of validators. So in the case of Ethereum, we have 600,000 nodes that run the exact same computation. If you can bring the prover overhead below 600,000x, then all of a sudden it makes sense for somebody to pre-compress this work before it's sent to 600,000 people. Another case is where 2 parties that want to have a trustless relationship, in other words, they check all of each other's work, have asymmetric compute costs. So a common case for this is when you want to verify something on chain. Running things on chain is extremely expensive. If anybody has done a blockchain transaction, you know you pay a lot for that very small amount of compute. And so you can think of on-chain as a compute environment with incredibly high compute costs, but you can do some work off-chain in a data center where it's incredibly cheap. So very asymmetric compute costs, succinct VMs make sense. So in our eyes, there was obvious demand for ZK VMs, that is block space, but we're also willing to bet that ZK VMs will be applied more broadly. ZK is the closest thing I've seen to algorithmic magic in my career. In the early 2000s, TLS, or Transport Layer Security, HTTPS, or just the standard for encryption on the internet, brought the internet to a new era where writing sensitive details back to servers was possible for normal application developers with little cryptography experience. We take this for granted today, but Web 2 entities didn't, big tech entities didn't. They used the last 20 years to become the most powerful entities in the modern world. They are fundamental to modern democracies. In broad strokes, society trusts the Web 2 monopolies, but there's reasons to believe that these entities shouldn't have a stranglehold on innovation. We believe tools like Jolt will increase the practicality of decentralized alternatives. So we take bets on technology which can lighten the burden of entrepreneurship. We believe deeply that decentralized and trustless systems will re-architect the internet and society in its process. Jolt de-risks the uncertainty of the technical roadmap of teams in the space. They can focus on their core product or network and bringing value to their users. This should be the bread and butter of any company. Jolt is an idealized example of what we target at a16z crypto engineering. Core tooling, which has leverage over the space, and on its own is not a business. Innovation needs this tooling, but it's unclear if there's an incentive-compatible party to build it. For us, a rising tide rises all ships. We are the incentive-compatible party for innovation. Okay, cool. Thank you. Appreciate you guys listening.